my parents, they brought their culture with them,
Right.
and they might not necessarily have picked up Western influences or integrated, because they didn't go to school here. They don't understand the system. So yeah, sometimes it can be a bit messy trying to balance two or three identities, and you can often feel like you're in the middle, feel very torn because you don't want to reject one identity over the other. And I guess when it comes to Western influences, like it's deemed as very cool, I suppose. And, it's a cool thing to do and you fit in and you belong. And I think Blinded by the Light kind of demonstrated that it was all about belonging and being accepted and just being able to like what you want to be able to like without getting told off for it, I
Hmm.
guess, or that you're rejecting anything else.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, but joining me today, we are kind of taking a road away from Bruce Springsteen. I'm sure he will come up because he always does, but I have a fellow podcaster, one of my UK friends. So once again, I'm drinking morning coffee. She may be drinking afternoon tea. And we are ready to talk. So, Callsuma, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, hi, Jesse. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to take part in today's conversation, being a fellow podcaster and a lover of music.
Yeah, I love it. It was you are only the second person that has reached out to me via LinkedIn. Most of my guests I get via Twitter or someone connects, but I just thought it was great. In LinkedIn, you've got your stuffy old business, and most of the emails you get are people like my job is running a call center. So most of my emails are about, hey, do you want to hear about our new technology? Or, hey, I run a staffing agency. Do you need to hire people? And so it was really nice to get a message from you like, oh, I'm a podcaster too. Would you want to visit?
I know, right? LinkedIn is so stuffy and it's very salesy. So, I mean, I think since joining that podcasting group, I was surprised how many podcasters were on LinkedIn and that there was a group dedicated to that. So, it was very refreshing to connect with you.
It was, and I'm hoping maybe in this year we can be a little more. I'd love to exchange guests like you and I are doing, maybe exchange reviews, kind of listen to something and give constructive criticism, because I know I could make my podcast better. As you said, it's a labor of love for us. We just do
Mm,
this because it's fun.
mm,
Well,
absolutely.
so tell us a little about yourself, Cosima.
Yeah, sure. So I am from Greater London. I work in bereavement, which might seem all doom and gloom, but death is one thing we all have in common. I'm a fellow podcaster as well. My podcast is very much about grief from the perspective of the diaspora. I love writing and I love anything audio and radio. I grew up to the radio, the sound of the radio. And yeah, just, being a greater London girl, but also, my background, I have a dual identity. My parents are of Bangladeshi origin. So they came to the UK in the 50s in the wake of the Second World War to rebuild Britain, when the British the British were everywhere, let's be
Hmm.
real here. So
Sure.
they were in India. And so the Commonwealth pretty much rebuilt the UK, and it is what it is because of the Commonwealth countries. So that's kind of how, my background and why I was born and bred in the UK, because my parents were part of that wave of migration. So I kind of hold a dual identity. I speak Bengali fluently, went, born and bred in Britain and went to a British school, have a lot of British influences, but also have a traditional Bengali side to me as well. So yeah, sometimes messy, sometimes a good thing.
You know, um, there was a film out year before last called Blinded by the Light, which
Oh
was
yes,
based on a true story. Okay.
yes.
And I ended up reading the book, and the book was, yes, certainly about Bruce, but the book was a lot about the writer coming to terms of being Pakistani and British.
Mm,
That he is both.
mm.
And so I hear the same thing from you, right? That you and I think that's the US has that common a lot. You will feel people that, feel like they're Irish and American. They're proud of their Italian roots, and of course they're American. So I think that's a kind of fun story, and I bet that does get messy sometimes.
Oh yeah, and I mean I've seen Blinded by the Light, and I think so many of us that have dual identity related to it because it can be, my parents, they brought their culture with them,
Right?
and they might not necessarily have picked up Western influences or integrated, because they didn't go to school here, they don't understand the system. So yeah, sometimes it can be a bit messy trying to balance two or three identities, and you can often feel like you're in the middle, feel very torn because you don't want to reject one identity over the other. And I guess when it comes to Western influences, like it's deemed as very cool, I suppose. And, it's a cool thing to do and you fit in and you belong. And I think Blinded by the Light kind of demonstrated that it was all about belonging and being accepted and just being able to like what you want to be able to like without getting told off for it, I
Hmm.
guess, or that you're rejecting anything else.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, obviously, being such a Springsteen fan, when I saw the first preview, I loved it, and I played the preview at an office. We were doing a meeting, and they joked like I would go to they're like, you're going to go to see that movie a dozen times, and so I love that passion, and I'm glad to know that it spoke to you from your background too. That it's different but similar. Yeah. Well, you're already brought this up, but I always like to go to the beginning. So first off, before I get to that, how are you doing during this crazy pandemic?
Oh my gosh, Jesse. I'm so glad you asked me this question because I think we do need to talk about it, don't we? Because
Yes.
it's crazy times. So like for me a year ago, this was before the lockdown, my dad died suddenly,
Okay.
just before we all went into the lockdown at the end of
Mhm.
January. And so I spent most of 2020 grieving in a lockdown. When I got sent home, it was like I was, when people get sacked, they get a box and you have to put everything in a box.
Right.
Well, literally, I emptied my desk and put it in a box, not because I was
Hmm.
getting sacked, because we had
Yeah.
to work from home. And so for me, it came at a really good time because my dad had just died. And, I don't know what compassionate leave is like in the UK, but something that I talk about a lot on my own podcast is that it needs to get better. And I feel like this coronavirus and the pandemic has really proved that actually we need to take time out for peace, for love, for time with our family to process, you know, all these deaths and just the fragility of life, really, how fragile life really is. And for me, if I hadn't been sent home, like in a way, there's a silver lining in the lockdown for me. And I know that sounds strange because for so many people, the lockdown and working from home was not a silver lining. But
Yeah.
for me, it really was because I was so close to my father and I really just didn't want to go back to work within 3 days to be like, oh, I'm over it. And people just sort of beating around the bush. It's like a British saying, being awkward, kind of walking on eggshells and stuff. I just don't really like that office politics side of things. And for me to work from home, have my own time and space, it's been really good for me. But then equally on the flip side, when you go outside and you see people not wearing masks, well, that's a bit crazy.
Yes.
Hello, do you know what's going on?
Do so we have a fair amount of people here in the US, and I will blame it on our former president. He said I'm not going to wear a mask, and they made it a political issue instead of a health issue. Like this is
Mm,
not um and a lot of people try to push it. Well, like you shouldn't you shouldn't have to make me wear a helmet if I'm riding a motorbike. Like, okay, but you can only hurt yourself. Like if you crash with not wearing a helmet, you're only going to hurt yourself. Not wearing a mask, you're putting other people at risk. And just it's just the decent, kind thing to do.
Absolutely. We're all in the same ship here. Doesn't matter how much money you got or how rich you are.
Yeah.
We're all in the same box right now. So I find that whole thing really, really crazy. It's almost like people think they're immune to this virus,
Mm,
and that's why they think it's okay to not wear a mask. And I think it's even more disturbing when you see that some of the people that I've seen where I live in suburban London, because I live near the Grand Union Canal, so it is a little bit green and very nature.
yeah.
Um, their kids are, they're just walking around with their kids as well, and I'm like, protect your children. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. We did. I do think it's crazy, and I was lucky enough that I had started a new job in January or February. We locked
Mm,
down in March. We spent 2 months working from home. We went back into the office toward May, and I've been in the office ever since. But we're every day I'm met at the door with someone taking my temperature. We ask all the questions. We are trying to be as safe as we can, and it just does. I went home to Louisiana. That's where my mom still lives,
mm.
and like half the people were just wandering around a Home Depot without a mask, and you're just looking
Oh.
like, "What are you doing? Like what? What? Why? How could you do this?" So yeah, I am glad you had the time. And the other point I wanted to make is I think across the board, and I don't know what the right answer is, but I know the correct answer isn't, hey, you've lost your mom, you've lost your dad, you've lost your spouse. Here's 3 days. Use them as you need. Um, and I realize a business is a business, and it may take you 2 weeks to grieve, and how did they let you off all that time? But there seems to be something else we should be able to do, right?
Absolutely. I think mental health in the workplace, we don't invest in it enough. I don't know what it's like in the US, but I know in the UK it's really, really bad. And we really need to start educating ourselves on what that really means, what the
Hmm.
implications are. If you want to retain staff, it's in your best interest as a company. Because we've invested that time, invest in our well-being. I don't think that that's asking for much. I think that's just acknowledging that we're not robots. We're all human beings. And look at us now in this pandemic.
Hmm.
We're all feeling it. So
Yeah, we are.
please please just give some compassionate leave. I can't get my head around how we're just treated as like commodities.
Yeah,
It's just business.
I absolutely agree. Well, I am glad. I am sorry about your father's loss. I know that, but I will give you the words of Bruce Springsteen, because obviously do. In 2012, Clarence Clemens, the saxophone player, had died.
Mm,
And a few years before that, Danny Federici, who was the organ player, had died. They were both original members of the E Street Band. And
mm,
so they were touring for the first time without both of them. And there is a song called My City of Ruin.
mm,
And in the middle of it, Bruce stopped and said, "Are we missing anyone?" And people started
mm.
screaming, "Are we missing anyone?"
Oh gosh.
And he said, "Well, I want you to know, if we're here and you're there, they're here."
Yeah.
And I when I heard that, I brought tears to me, because I've lost my grandparents. I've lost, my father, my stepfather, who I was adored both. And, when you're there at that family gathering,
Mm,
pre-COVID, when you would
mm.
have, a dozen, all these friends around with, food and laughter, they would be there. You would miss them, but you're like, if we're here and you're here, they're here. It
That's
just
it.
it that brought comfort to me. So he's always with you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, it doesn't matter where I am in life, Jesse, he is beside me. He is right next to me, honestly. I
Mhm.
completely believe that.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go back. You're being raised, your family has immigrated here. You talked about the radio was on all the time. So
Mm.
were they fans of music, or did you just find music on your own?
Well, this is an interesting story, right?
Okay.
So obviously my parents are Bengali, so they brought Bengali music with them. But if you're going to a British school and you're with British English children, you are kind of like the other and you are different and you don't want to be different. So you want to fit
Exactly.
in. And it's always like that when you got dual identity. So my music influences and anything to do with popular culture comes from my siblings. We have very big age gaps. They are like 10, 15 years older than me.
Okay.
And what I often just mirrored what they like. And so it's whatever my older sister was listening to. So my sister just loved listening to the radio. She loved the Carpenters, She used to enter all these music competitions, and we used to watch Top of the Pops all the time without fail on a Friday. Coming from a working class family, couldn't really afford to do a lot in terms of fun. So TV and radio was kind of like our fun time, and it was just absorbing just all the different artists and different genres of music. So that's kind of how I really got into music, because of my sister and my brothers, who all loved music. And they would buy vinyl and they would buy tapes, because they all had part-time jobs in supermarkets at the time. And so I just sort of mirrored them, and I think that's where my musical taste comes from.
Callsuma, I have to tell you that that is a story I hear often on this podcast.
Mm,
Siblings are a huge influence, one way or the other.
mm,
Either you're the oldest and you are influencing your younger brothers and sisters, or you're younger and you either learn to love the music they love, or sometimes there's a rebellion where, like, the older siblings may like some kind of music and you tend to go to a different genre. Like you might find punk or reggae or
mm.
blues, that your other was into more classic rock and roll, or vice versa. So that's interesting. um as you started going, what you said you loved 80s music.
Yeah.
When we talk to me a little bit about that.
Right. So, I was born in the 80s. My first part of my primary school age was the 80s and very early 90s. And for me, my one of my earliest memories is that my both of my older sisters threw a Madonna party for me on my ninth birthday party. And I didn't know if that was I don't know if a Madonna party is a thing, but I'm realizing now in popular culture, when they go back in time, a Madonna party was a thing. But I didn't know
Yes.
that until recently.
Yes.
But clearly my older siblings knew, because that was the time that they were living. I just didn't know. So they threw me this massive Madonna party, because she was so in then, 80s Madonna.
Sure.
Um, and I just remember listening to Holiday and Lucky Star and Into the Groove, and doing musical chairs and Parcel with all my primary school friends, and everyone just running around and trashing the place.
Hmm.
So for me, that's like one of my oldest memories, and then maybe that's why I love Madonna in the 80s. I don't know about so much now, but I just particularly like her music in the 80s, because that was the sound of my childhood.
Yeah.
And when you've for me, I didn't have many birthday parties, but that was one of my happiest memories. And so I always attach 80s Madonna to my birthday party, and just a very happy time that you can never really go back, can you? It's not like we
No.
have time travel. So
But and I joke about that in a lot of ways. Music is a TARDIS. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, right? And you
mm,
hear that Material Girl or something, you do in your mind go back to that time.
that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Uh, Other bands besides Madonna that you loved?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Like, and people usually take the mickey out of me when I say I love Duran Duran and I love Tears for Fears. But they were the sound of the 80s, and that's what my siblings were listening to. So like for me, Tears for Fears were an excellent band. Like Everyone Wants to Rule the World, I know it's really cheesy. I guess I'm just like a really cheesy puff person, but it's just the sound. I It just takes me and transports me to a place that we'll never get back again. Because if you look at the times we're living now with technology and digital, that was a different time. That was pure. That to me, it was a pure, innocent, just happy with the simple things in life. So I guess Duran Duran, Tears for Fears, and also Mr. Mister as well. Was the other band that I really, really liked. But again, I know people that are listening to this are gonna be like, wow, this girl is so cheesy.
No, I bet they're going to go, especially if they grew up at the same time as you did. They're going to go, yes, I love that band, MTV and all this stuff. Were there any US bands that you liked?
I mean, Carpenters probably, because the story about the Carpenters is that my older sister had their album on tape
Okay.
and she was obsessed with them. And I didn't know who they were. But then, of course, I learned they're a duo from America, the 70s. And
Yeah,
it's really tragic how Karen died, of course. Um,
absolutely.
but she was such a talent. Like, if
Absolutely.
her voice was just phenomenal. And see, the thing is, I think the radio has a lot to do with it because the Carpenters did sing Yesterday Once More, I think it is, which is about the sound of the radio
Yeah.
and how the radio makes you feel. But for me, that's something that I got from my sister because she would just on repeat every weekend, just on repeat, play it. And I didn't understand at the time, but now I kind of understand more. Was she sad? Was she just hooked by the sounds that she found on the radio because there wasn't much else to do during that time, or we couldn't afford to go to concerts? And just she'd do little things like ring up the radio stations because they would have these Carpenters music competitions or other music competitions, but the Carpenters specifically, oh my god, she used to ring up my dad's phone bill because they're premium numbers, right? And my dad, he'd just be like, why are there all these premium numbers? And of course, it's my sister calling the radio station because she wants to win something of the Carpenters or get on and talk about how much she loves the Carpenters on radio. And that's what I mean. She did that. It's hilarious because she would just stay in the line trying to get her voice heard.
Right.
And I think the sad thing is, I can't remember if she did ever get on the phone, like if she ever did get picked,
Mhm.
but she had to pay that back because she worked in a supermarket part time. My dad was like, "You're paying that back." And yeah, so like I think that's probably one of my favorite bands because I've got all of their CDs, and I that Yesterday Once More is probably my favorite just because it is about the radio.
And it makes you think of your sister and
Always.
the beauty of that radio, that magic. Um, I had a little AM clock radio next to my bed, and that's, you would listen to, I didn't talk about, you didn't have this high, you know, high end hi-fi. You just had this little
That's it.
clock radio that just played the music, and
That's
it was
it.
just something special for it. I totally get that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I love the sound of the radio, and I think that there will be a certain generation that grew up to the radio. I know it's different now,
Right.
but because we've got apps and all sorts of other things now,
Yeah.
and Spotify and whatnot. But the sound of the radio is where I learned about music
Yeah.
and where I grew a taste for music and where I connected with music, and it will just always remind me of a time that I can never get back, a good time.
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. Um, so I want to get off music just for a moment and
Yeah.
talk to me about your podcast. How did you come up with this idea? And what's
Oh,
the name of the podcast?
oh, sure. So the name of my podcast is Bereavement Room. It was launched a year and a half ago. The backstory is that it was initially a deaf cafe. Do you know what a deaf cafe is, or should I give a quick snapshot?
Please do.
So a deaf cafe. Actually, I believe they're popular in the US. I think they started in Phoenix. So deaf cafes is kind of like where you meet other people that have been bereaved in a group, and you would share stories, or you could listen if you want, and you have tea and coffee and cake and just listen and share stories with one another and connect over your loss. And it's very much being in solidarity with one another, because loss is such a it's a huge magnitude change in your life. So initially it was a deaf cafe, but it was a deaf cafe for minoritized voices, because in the UK we don't often talk about deaf for various reasons, like being stigmatized in our communities, or because of systemic racism, or things like that. So I started this deaf cafe, and then it just evolved into a podcast, because I wanted to reach people not just in London, but I wanted to reach people across the UK, like in Scotland, in Birmingham, in Manchester, other cities, and also America. And so I just decided that I'd scrap the Deaf Cafe, because that's a face-to-face thing, and make it a podcast. And so that's how Bereavement Room was born. And it platforms the voices that you would never usually hear from, where they talk about their various identities and their backgrounds and the experiences they've gone through at university when they've suffered loss, experiences they've gone through medical negligence. For others, it's just being able to share their story for the first time and be heard, because listening is underrated. Listening is a skill. I don't think we listen enough. I think as human beings we can never really perfect our listening, but my podcast is very much a listening platform, and you can learn so much from people's experiences. And it's not all doom and gloom. I know death seems like people don't want to talk about that, do they, until they have to
Right.
face it.
Absolutely. I was going to ask if I'm sure there are episodes that are sadder than others, but I think I'm sure there's got to be episodes where funny stories are shared and
Oh yeah.
laughter. You're right.
Oh my God, we're always laughing. If
Yeah.
we're not laughing, we're getting angry, and then we're crying. But there's a lot
Yeah.
of laughter, and there's a lot of truth, and
Mm,
it isn't all misery. And the stories vary, because yeah, sure, grief is universal, but the narrative around bereavement is not. And we always end every episode with gratitude, because not to find a silver lining, but because there's always something to be grateful for in our lives, right?
yes, I agree.
Yeah, and it isn't all doom and gloom. And I would highly recommend people, if they're interested in learning about different people and faiths and cultures, it's a really great space to be in, and it's not depressing, I promise you. It might seem it, but it's not.
No, I think especially if you've gone through a loss, hearing people sharing similar stories. You know, Calcima, is there a universal or is there a overall theme that you hear often as people are sharing their stories?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I guess, Jesse, what I've learned is that people need to be heard. They don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be rescued. I think grievers just want someone that can listen without imposing or interjecting their own projections. And for me, the theme is that I've realized that all of my guests, the biggest gift you can give is listening,
Right.
to offer them a safe space, because they may not have had it, or if they have, to be able to just at least share their story again with the world, with the hope to help someone. And the ongoing theme really of the podcast is to reach as many people as possible. Yeah, sure, there's a message behind "you're not alone," but I think essentially we all live it differently. So grief is a lonely walk in the park, but it's just to know that other people are grieving, and you can kind of be in that space and hear and share and be in solidarity with people. And for me, I think that the ongoing theme is just let's just listen to one another, because we don't do it enough in our environments. And I honestly think mental health would come down if we listened more. And that's really what I would say is the ongoing theme with everyone on the podcast, because people come to me with murder stories,
Mm,
suicide, child bereavement, medical
mm,
negligence, unknown causes of death, sudden causes of death. It's a variety of narratives, but I think identity is what pulls us in. The fact that we're all minoritized and we've never been given the space to speak. And particularly when it comes to counseling and psychotherapy, everyone's got something to say about that,
Sure.
because counseling and psychotherapy is very much, it is dominated by our white middle class females. And if you're coming from dual identity, you need someone that can relate to your culture and background without having to pay £100 for 50 minutes to explain what your culture and background is.
Yeah,
So
I
there's
could
a lot of
see. Yeah,
nuances. Yeah.
absolutely. I also think it can be depending on you know your different faiths, of your religious beliefs or non-religious beliefs.
Mm,
I know that one of the things that um, Penn from the Penn and Teller, the Magic Act, has always been a very vocal atheist, and things that hurt him so much was, well, that's because you've never lost a parent. Once you've lost a parent, you'll no longer be an atheist. And he
oh
was like,
gosh.
what a horrible thing to say. And by the way, he has lost both his parents and his sister. And I think that I know that faith can be a big help for people, but I
Mm,
also think that, if you don't have a belief, you still have to mourn and work things through well. And
mm,
people knowing not exactly what you're going through, but something similar, I do
mm,
think that would be a very healthy and healing podcast.
mm. Oh yeah, and it's been described as that by the guests. A lot of them have said, I feel it was a catalyst in my healing process.
Oh, that's nice. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll share one of my favorite stories. When my father died,
Mm,
my mom asked me to speak at his funeral, and so I had to tell the story that my father could be very cranky, and we were at they were at a restaurant. I did not see this, but I've heard the story told by multiple people, so I know it's true. And he was eating, and he liked to drink his coffee almost cold. So the waitress came and topped off his coffee without talking to him. So now it was hot again. And he said, "Excuse me, could I get another cup of coffee?" She goes, "Oh, I just filled up your coffee." "No, no, no. Could I get a second cup of coffee?" So she did, and she brought the second coffee, and he pointed to the new coffee and says, "Okay, this is your coffee. You can do whatever the hell you want to do with that coffee. This is my coffee. Leave it alone." I felt so horrible for the waitress, but it was such a great story about, the oddity of my father. And so I often tell that story just to talk about how peculiar he could be and how grumpy. But, I say it with a lot of love in my heart. So I'm sure you get stories like that in your podcast.
oh yeah, all the time. I mean, there's quirks, isn't it? Our loved ones all
Yes.
had their quirks, and it's funny that those are the things that we probably remember the most, and, and that's what we laugh about.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a story that you love to tell about your father you'd want to share?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I guess because of the age that my dad was and the generation that he was quite old school. And I guess this is something Bengalis would understand more so. There's these old school Bengali cussing words, and only the elderly, right? Only the elderly. It only sounds good when the elders say it. Our elders
Yes.
say it, not the younger generation.
Right.
And it was always funny and entertaining when my dad was in that mode, because we as our generation wouldn't use those words because they're very old school words.
Yeah.
And I guess my I laugh when I think of those cussing moments, because it's just like a very Bengali thing.
Yes, I imagine.
Yeah, and I'm sure it correlates with all cultures and communities, wherever you're from.
Right.
And I think that makes me laugh the most, because I can't share that anymore. I could only have that with my dad. I could only speak in Bangla with my dad. And although I could speak with my sisters and brothers, they'll respond to me in English because they're annoying like that.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
And whereas with my dad, I think the funny stories are just speaking in Bengali, and
Hmm.
some of them, I miss some of those cussing words, and yeah, there's so many. I guess
Hmm.
that I'm still processing things as a year down the line.
Yeah.
But he really was my best friend. So there's just so much, so much. We'd watch telly together, and yeah, he was just, he definitely liked his fried chicken, that was for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, he loved his food and loved his fried chicken. So yeah, there's just so many, but I think
Yeah.
that the ones when it comes to Bengali dialogue, because it is so much about my identity, um, it's so tied to my identity that now he's gone. I think when you've lost both set of parents, right? It's an end of an era, an
Yes.
end of a chapter. And I think for me, I'll never be able to speak Bengali with anyone in that same way again. But because it's so humorous, the language is a colloquial language. It's humorous and it's funny, and
Yeah.
there's certain words that I will not hear again. I would have only heard from my father's mouth. So yeah, I think it's the cussing words.
I love that story. That is awesome. That is so wonderful.
Yeah.
So, what's next for the podcast? What do you plan to do next?
Right. So I've just come to the end of 2 seasons, right, Jesse? And I'm
Hmm.
taking a break because there is a lot of emotional labor attached to it when you're hearing other people's stories, a lot of transference. And,
Yes.
it took us from 2019 to 2020. I raised money to fund season 3 because I just, as we were saying earlier, we don't know about feedback, what people
Right.
think if they're not leaving reviews. So I was just like, do you want a season 3? Because I know I have an international listen, but do you want a season 3? Because there's no point me producing something if you don't want it.
Yeah.
Because I've kind of come to the end now,
Hmm.
and so people said no, we definitely want a season 3. They love it. They want a season 3. They want me to continue doing this work. So I raised a little bit of money to fund season 3 and some of the hosting cost sites.
Oh,
So
good.
so yeah, so that's really great news.
That
And
is great news.
isn't it? And it's good to have people behind you. All of my support has come from strangers, not the people in my environment, weirdly. I don't know if you get that, but
Yeah.
yeah, you do. So you know the
Yeah,
feeling.
I do know the feeling. Yeah, what's been lovely about me is I have one family member that when I started a Patreon page, um, I don't want to embarrass her, but she jumped on immediately to support. And I don't even know if she listens to the podcast. She just loves me and wants to support me. But everyone else has been through this community of other Springsteen fans and listeners that are just, we want to hear the stories. We want to hear people share their kind of why Bruce and other musicians, have helped them through their life. And I believe that music is healing and
Mm,
cathartic, and so that's why I do this, and that's
yeah,
why I thought this would be interesting to have you on, because you're sharing and listening is cathartic, and similar to listening to music and sharing stories. So yeah, so yes, I absolutely know that feeling, and we do this, labor of love. We say that over and over again. It really is true. But, you also don't want to shout out to an empty room. And if no
that's
one
it.
cares, well then, okay,
That's it.
maybe I need to move on. So yeah, hearing from feedback is very important.
Oh yeah, it's really valuable. Even the
Hmm.
constructive criticism stuff
Yes.
too. And the next stage of that is the third season starts at the beginning of summer, and I'll take everyone through the summer to autumn.
How do you find your guests?
Oh my God, I love my guests because I research them, obviously. I research them, and there's a lot of planning that goes into it. But yeah, I feel like I've met so many people that I wouldn't have usually met had I not done this podcast. And we've all connected with something that we all have in common, that we've lost someone that we love, and that we care about social justice. Um, and I don't know, it's like we're a family. I call it the BR family.
Sure, absolutely. And because of COVID, we have, people have lost, a lot of people. So I think dealing with grief and working through that, I think this is wonderful work, and I'm so happy that we got to talk and I found your podcast. That's amazing. So, Calcima, what else should I ask you that I haven't asked?
Oh, I don't know. It's quite hard. No one ever asked me that question. It's quite refreshing to sit in this seat. Anything you want to know, I'm an open book, and I'm always happy to share.
Okay, well, good. Well, all right. Tell us how we can find your podcast, and if they want to give you feedback, what's the best way? I know you're on Twitter, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay, so Bereavement Room, you can find it on all podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, wherever you like to listen to your podcast, you'll find it there. I'm on Instagram as well. The handle is at Bereavement Room. Also on Twitter at Bereavement Room. And if you're interested in me, then my Twitter handle is at Callsuma Ali. And yeah, if you want to leave a review, if any of the episodes were interesting, please do leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I'd really appreciate it. I love hearing from people. My listeners always write to me, and my DMs are open.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. All right. So before I let you go, I gave you homework for the Mary question. So
Yes.
for those of you who let's say you're fans of the Bereavement Room, and that's why you're listening, or you love Calcima, and that's why you're listening. The Mary question is this: Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired, but when he every year his senior class would get together and they would spend 2 days breaking apart the Springsteen song Thunder Road. They would
Mm.
listen to all the lyrics, they would read, they talk about the imagery, the themes that Bruce is exploring. And then at the end of the 2 days, Jay would ask the question, do you think Mary gets in the car at the end of the song? So, Calcima, that's your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
I feel like I've got two answers for this.
That's okay. That's perfectly acceptable.
For context, all right, I should probably say that I love Bruce Springsteen, but that's not my favorite track of his. I love the lyrics and the harmonica, but I don't know. I think the sound. Well, anyway, I'm not a music mogul. That's a
Okay.
production issue.
Okay.
But in terms of did Mary get in the car, the last three lines of that song, I would like to think that she did in that era because that was the golden age of the American dream.
Okay.
And I think I would like to think that she did because love is a risk, right? And I think people did take risks back then. But at the same time, on a feminist perspective, well, if she didn't get in the car, that's also okay because, women, we're out here for ourselves and doing it for ourselves and, take your bra off and stuff like that. So, like, I think it's okay if she didn't get in the car, but me being the lover that I am, like, I'm a lover, not a fighter,
Yes.
and I'm a sucker for it, and I believe in that. I really hope that she did get in the car because he was saying that this town is full of losers and they can make their own dream and they can make their own happiness, and there's something really pure about love, something pure and innocent. And I don't know how old Mary was back then. I'm assuming she was quite young because that's what younger people used to do. But I really hope she did take the risk because I know if I was Mary, I would have got in the car and I would have been to hell with this town of losers. So I hope that she did. But equally, if she didn't, I'm not going to hold it against her. But in terms of who I am, like we need more love in the world. And honestly, I think sometimes love is a risk. And I really like deep inside, I hope she did get in the car and they did make a life of it.
I love that answer. That's a great answer. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Uh, any final thoughts you want to share with the audience?
Oh, just like, usually I'm always talking about grief and stuff, but I guess being a lover of music, growing up to radio, really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much for the opportunity to come here and kind of intersect with grief and music. I think that's such a lovely meeting to have. And yeah, I think music is wonderful. If it takes you back to somewhere, definitely spend time in music because, we can really get bogged down with social media and doom scrolling. And I think ever since you invited me onto your show about Bruce Springsteen, it's made me want to kind of start listening to music more rather than doom scrolling on social media, which can easily happen and you can easily get lost in it. But yeah, thanks to everyone for listening and thank you for having me.
So I'm going to end with, first off, thank you so much for sharing and for fighting the good fight to help people get through their griefs. Bruce just put out a new album at the end of 2020 called Letter to You. And the very last song is I'll See You in My Dreams. And the
Oh,
lyrics are, I'll see you in my dreams when all the summers have come to an end. I'll see you in my dreams. We'll meet and live and love again. I'll see you in my dreams, yeah, up around the river bend, for death is not the end. And I'll see you in my dreams. I'll see you in my dreams.
oh my gosh, that's so serendipitous.
It is. And so I thought that was a perfect way to end the podcast. You have been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Listeners, please go check out her podcast. But remember to social distance. Remember to wash your hands. Remember to wear a mask. And let's all be good to each other because that's the only way we're going to get through this. For now, thank you, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Merry Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission. All right, thank you. Did you have fun?
Oh my God, I loved it. It was so fun. So fun. What an amazing idea. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Well, all right, yeah. And so the song is I'll See You in My Dreams. So Google it and check it out. I think it is the premise of the album, the initial thought of this is his first band was the Castiles. And a couple of years ago, the last remaining member of the band, except for him, died.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so Bruce realized he was the last man standing.
That's it. Yeah.
And it kind of led him to this. So the album is a very reflective of the people that he's lost and kind of it's a review of his career. It's a really, I think if you check out the CD, you will go, wow, this is all about grief and moving on. So I think you'll love it.
My God, that's crazy, isn't it? The timing of this podcast.
Yes, it is.
And it came out at the end of 2020.
Yes.
And I didn't know that. So yeah, I'm definitely going to look that up now.
Good.
But isn't that like really serendipitous?
It is very serendipitous. That's what I was right. And in fact, the song starts with the road is long and seemingly without end. The days go on. I remember you, my friend. And though you're gone and my heart's been empty as it seems, I'll see you in my dreams.
Yeah, and grief dreams is something that I've been having a lot recently, so I can really relate to those lyrics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so please check it out and let me know. And after you listen to the album, if you have thoughts, reach out to me and we'll have you back on again and talk about the album. Okay.
Okay, that sounds brilliant. I'd love to do that. Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon. I
You
appreciate
too.
you. Bye
You
bye.
too. Take care, Jesse.
Bye bye.
Bye.